Good to go. Isha, go ahead.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Isha Thakkar, first year student of BAJMC. Warm welcome to all at Vichar Vimarsh NUV Idea Fest 2020. To take the event forward, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Nilay Yagnik, Provost and Vice Chancellor, Navrachna University. He is the alumnus of BITS Pilani and has pursued Masters of Management Studies from the Narsi Munji Institute of Management Studies, Mumbai, and PhD from the University of Mumbai. He has over 13 years of experience in the IT industry with companies such as Wipro Infotech, Digital HP, and Mastech. He also has 27 years of teaching experience. He has mentored technology startups and serves on the advisory boards of several organizations. He has several years of academic leadership experience, including the position of Dean and Director of leading institutes in Mumbai. He was professor and chairman of the Information Systems area at the Narsi Munji Institute of Management Studies, Mumbai. He has several publications to his credit at the national and international level. He's a corporate trainer and serves on the Digital Technology Committee and the Higher Education Committee of the IMC Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Mumbai. He's an alumnus of the Harvard Business School Global Colloquium on Participant Centered Learning held in Boston, USA. May I request you, sir, to deliver the welcome address?
Thank you, Isha. And good afternoon to all of you. We have a very special guest today, Dr. Nishant Shah. And let me welcome Dr. Nishant Shah formally to Navrachna University. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. Given your huge international background, it'll be very interesting to see your address today on the aspect of fakeness, especially with respect to the digital era that we're living in. And you're speaking to us live right now from the Netherlands. So there's certainly a time zone difference, and we thank you so much for spending your valuable time out today. This particular Vichar Vimarsh program is the second initiative that we have taken, the second Vichar Vimarsh program. Last year, we had the first one. And this is organized by the Center for Education, Innovation and Research. The center is headed by Dr. Vandana Talagaonkar. And the center focuses on all aspects of research in the field of education, both higher education as well as primary education and school level education as well. The idea of this center is to make it very vibrant and the ability to give thought leadership in the field of education to the society outside. And therefore, an idea kind of a fest is organized by this particular center. And that's what Vichar Vimarsh is all about. It's a platform where we discuss various things, where we debate, where we deliberate, where we share viewpoints and counter viewpoints also, because that's what a university is all about. And with our experience in education, our university has a very strong education program and a school also of education. And we are, therefore, with that kind of expertise behind us, we thought we should do a lot of research and contribute to the society through our thought leadership. This particular topic, which Dr. Vandana and her team have chosen today, is about digital spaces. In fact, the entire Vichar Vimarsh session will be spread over multiple lectures over a few weeks. And it'll cover areas like today's aspect of digital narratives in the fake news era. We will discuss about digital humanities. We will discuss digital anthropology and various other aspects connected with digital, because the world today is increasingly digital. And education increasingly is becoming more and more digital. How do we ensure that the learning happens at all levels in this digital space? And how do we ensure that learning does not get affected in any way, and it kind of simulates what happens in the real physical world as well. So I wish this particular Vichar Vimarsh all the very best. Congratulations to Dr. Vandana and her team in the Center for Education, Innovation and Research. And I also wish to thank Dr. Nishant Shah for joining us today. Thank you so much today, sir.
Thank you, sir, for the warm welcome address. Could I please invite Dr. Vandana Telagaonkar, Head Center for Education Innovation and Research and Associate Professor at Navratna University, to give us an idea about Vichar Vimarsh.
Thank you, Isha. We have had a brief introduction to Vichar Vimarsh presented by Dr. Neela Yagnik. I'll speak a few specific points about this academic platform. Let me begin with the way this event is titled. It is Vichar Vimarsh NUV Idea Fest. So it's bilingual, and we want to convey a very strong message that we are interested in ideas wherein language barriers do not count. Moving ahead, the education at Navratna University is strongly based on interdisciplinarity, and it has offered various courses and platforms to strengthen it and to nurture it. So Vichar Vimarsh as a platform offers occasions where various thematics are explored from various disciplines so that a comprehensive understanding of the same is arrived at. The first edition of Vichar Vimarsh was organized last year. It was Vichar Vimarsh NUV Idea Fest 19, and it dealt with exploring aspects of storytelling, reading, writing, translation, and visual art. All proposed to be tools for creative expression, as well as we looked at these tools as tools to inculcate tolerance for diverse ideas. The present event, as has been already informed, is about the thematic of digital space as our lives are enmeshed in it presently. And the exploration of the digital space begins with the talk by Dr. Nishant Shah. Thank you. Isha?
Thank you, ma'am. I'm honored to introduce our speaker for the day, Dr. Nishant Shah. Dr. Nishant Shah is the Director of Research and Outreach and Professor of Aesthetics and Culture of Technology at the Artes University of the Arts, Netherlands. From 2009 to 14, he was the co-founder and former director of the non-profit research think tank Center for Internet and Society, Bangalore, India. As a knowledge partner with the Dutch Development Aid Agency, he was, from 2009 to 2016, he built a program called Civic Explorations. He leads a lot of interesting large-scale research projects around questions of internet and society. His research writings are accessible to public discourse and conversations, like the Digital Natives column he has been writing with the Indian Express for more than 10 years now. He now serves as a mentor on the Digital Earth Fellowship and is the Faculty Associate 2021 at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, Harvard University. He engages with students at bachelor's, master's, and doctoral level to make questions of identity, belonging, and care the central tenets of teaching. He's also associated with the Association of Progressive Communication as a mentor on the Feminist Internet Research Network, where they strive to bring feminist principles to the internet. Given the current dynamic relationship between the internet and the society, it would be a delight to hear Dr. Nishant speak on the topic Flirting with Fakeness, Digital Narration in a Post-Truth Milieu. We welcome you, sir. May I request you to deliver the talk?
Thank you, Isha. Thank you, everyone, Dr. Telagaonkar and the teams for making this possible. As I was just sharing before we started, I grew up in Gujarat, and that's still my home. But I don't really get many opportunities to come back and talk there. So I'm very excited about it. I also appreciate Dr. Talegaonkar already saying that this is a bilingual or a multilingual channel. And so I just want to let you know that while the talk, of course, is in English, I'm fairly fluent both in Gujarati and Hindi. So please do not make language a barrier and feel free to address me and engage with the conversations in a register that's familiar with you and comfortable. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. You're going to listen to me for about 35 minutes, which is a very, very long time to hear somebody. But I'm hoping that I have some fun images to go by and that will help with the conversation. So it is, in fact, quite a pleasure and delight for me to be engaging with you, despite the current state of the world where we are all physically distant and learning lessons in how to live apart together. So I also want to welcome you to this mediated conversation where we are going to mix real time with screen time. And as we get trapped in these narrow rectangles of our digital devices, we get to talk about, I don't know, ideas of truth, or perhaps more precisely, the ideas of fakeness. Now, I must begin with a warning. I think right now, as you are listening to me, there is at least a 50% chance that you are being cheated, because you have no idea of figuring out whether the Nishant Shah that you came to listen to is the Nishant Shah that you are listening to right now. For all you know, I could be a deep fake video, right? The final promise of digital technologies that have figured out a believable human speaker who could be simulated to offer machine lies as human truths. Even if you had some way of ensuring that I am not a machine, surely you can't be sure that I am the Nishant Shah, who is the author of the upcoming book Really Fake, based on which my talk is structured for today. At most, you can know that I am a Nishant Shah, right? You'll do a Google search and you'll see all these other Nishant Shahs who are also present, and you're not really going to be able to verify which one is which. And if you do believe that, in fact, I am human, that I am indeed the Nishant that was supposed to be here, you still have no way of knowing if what I'm offering to you in my talk today is the truth. It's highly possible, you will have to admit, especially if I go into personal experiences or my own histories, that I might be just lying through my teeth. And if you believe what I am saying, no matter how untruthful I might be, it's not fake, right? So what I'm proposing to you right now is that I cannot guarantee that everything I say today is the fact, but I know it to be the truth. And in this valley between not definitely the fact, but most certainly the truth, resides our conversation around fakeness, right? That something is fake only if it fools you. Our fakeness is not in what I say, but in how you believe it. So if we take this for a certainty, then welcome to the world of not knowing who we are, where we are going, and how we will know when we get there, where we are supposed to be. Because there is something very powerful in this claiming, naming, framing, and declaration of fakeness. Because to recognize things as fake is to recognize that fakeness is not just a permanent state of being, but that it is in fact comprised of multiple moving in and out of truthiness, right? So that's what I'm excited about. Like, when do you move in and move out of what is the truth? That fakeness, in fact, can be unstuck, if you will. And you know this because if you collapse the contexts of time, space, distance, duration, reception, circulation, like if you go far away from a moment, or if you go deep enough into it, a fakeness can be engineered as the truth, facts can be questioned as uncertain, and truth can be hidden under familiarity. And let me begin with a more concrete example of how this fakeness is something we continuously move in and out of by looking at the proliferation of a particular hashtag that's quite popular on social media platforms like YouTube or TikTok or Instagram. And this is the hashtag no homo, right? The hashtag no homo is a really strange one. It generally follows up on what could be seen as homoerotic or homo-curious expressions of love, affection, friendship, or intimacy between men. So its origins are in the misogynist and hypermasculine rap cultures where ferocious heterosexual maleness has to be overplayed repeatedly. And the no homo phrase has made its appearance to insist that despite what you might see in a musical video or a text, right, at the level of musicality, lyrics, or visual representations, you will see homosexuality, but homosexuality is not intended. Or even more so, the readings of homosexuality are not tolerated. In the context of India, which a lot of us share, we already know that homosexuality was a crime till very recently. And it continues still to be a huge social and cultural taboo. Queer and gay expressions hence find their biggest platforms only on social media and user-generated websites, or really bad Bollywood films where the only reason why we invoke sexuality is largely to laugh at it, right? Especially on Indian YouTube, there is a very particular set of videos called Kand videos. Kand, which of course is the Hindi word for fun, also has a duality in it because it's also translated as scandal. And it is used to define a subgenre of user-generated videos on popular video streaming websites like YouTube, Instagram, and so on. So Kand videos include a very wide range of videos, right? So they range from user-generated pornography between consenting adults, spy cams that capture surreptitious encounters, sting operations that seek to provide testimonies of promiscuity, anonymous cameras that kind of insinuate themselves into private spaces and exposing and leaking the people in it. There are self-recorded videos performing to popular Bollywood tunes, and largely, as you can see from this slide, a snapshot, groups of young men and women, generally gender separated, having a bit of fun in shared living spaces, in hostel dorms, in shared housing, and so on. In all of these types of Kand videos, the primary thing is that sexual activity and body are central to defining the core of what constitutes the Kand, right, or the scandal. So despite the sexual, bodily, physical intimacy, exchange, and activities, Kand videos are continuously marked with this hashtag called no homo. So if you go to the comment section in these Kand videos, there are people who come and spew abuse at these men who are having fun for being gay, for being effeminate, for engaging in unnatural acts, whatever that means, and for being a stain on Indian societies, whatever that means. So there are viewers who consume these Kand videos also as the only local expression of queer Indian body's desire and intimacy. Right? So it's a very strange field where the homophobic trolls and the closeted queer men both identify homoeroticism and the desire that is embedded in these videos. However, these homosexual identifications are continuously challenged by the people in the videos. So if somebody kind of goes and either marks these and reads these videos as homosexual, then they are derided, they are flagged as inappropriate, abused and threatened, or faced with this tag no homo, which appears almost compulsively. The performers themselves kind of take up this defensive no homo tone in their comments or description of the videos. So for me, it's been a bizarre assertion of fakeness. It says that this video, which often shows men in scantily clad clothes, touching, rubbing, dancing, and sometimes even making out with each other, they are in showers, in pools, in gyms, they are expressing physical connection, that these videos cannot be read as homosexual. If you call them homosexual or read homoerotic desire in it, then you are fake. The truth of the video does not lie in its content or in its reception, but in its intention, right? So this particular idea of moving in and out of fakeness, in and out of homo, no homo debates, is perhaps critical to understand how the current universe of digital fakeness is being constructed. And I'm going to try and offer 3 theses on how we can stick and unstick this fakeness when it comes to the question of digital truth telling. So the first proposition I have for you is that the mechanisms of fakeness mean that fakeness can be unstuck, right? It can be an attribute that can be continuously constructed. Or to make it very simple, fakeness is not something that is objectively within the content that you are observing, but that it is constructed by multiple conditions within which that object is located, right? So you could see 2 men kissing, but still say that this is not a homosexual representation, and both of those truths seem to exist in the same time. And this is often happening by creating a condition of what we call simultaneous plenty and scarcity. Because within the digital space, on the one hand, we are told that there is an abundance of information, right? In fact, so much information that we as human users will never be able to remember or even process it. The plenty of information necessarily means that there will always be information that you experience but did not sense. There will be information that surrounds you without you knowing about it. There is information that is stored and hoarded and counted and circulated, and you will have almost no control over it because you do not have the capacity to hold it anymore. And because of this plenty, because of this abundance, it necessarily then means that you will not be able to make a decision, because not all the information that you have is truthful. A large part of this information is fake, and you do not have the capacity to verify and process it. So your own senses and decisions for truth telling and truth sensing are now diminished, right? Fakeness or truthiness, which are human functions, have necessarily become technological functions. So your experience, interpretation, and understanding of the information will be negated by the intention that is put upon that information. So you might see a canned video and you might appreciate it as an expression of queer desire, but if the hashtag says no homo, then you are going to have to suspend your own interpretation and experience and agree that despite all the evidence that is in front of you, this is indeed not queer. So the more information you have, the more you will lose your ability to believe in it. It's no wonder then that we are kind of all slightly paranoid people, because the paranoia is not about the loss of information, but our ability to actually remember, recall, hold, and own the information with which we have often an intimate and a personal relationship. So fakeness becomes unstuck because these fake objects are continuously fooling us, convincing us that the message that they came with supersedes the knowledge of our own senses and interpretation. And that despite what you see, what you understand is not the truth, right? So that's the first idea of just thinking through how your own experience of knowledge is being superseded by different kinds of algorithmic practices, different kinds of taxonomies, different kinds of organization of information and hashtags, which give you content where your meaning-making capacity is overridden by digital algorithmic and circulation frameworks. The second proposition I want to make to you about why fakeness in the digital thrives so much is because something strange has happened to time. It's good to recognize that, strip it of all its fanciness, and it's very hard. The computer is a counting device. It's an obsessive regime of time organization and management, to such an extent that I'm guessing a lot of you younger students are not familiar with this, but those of us who are older, we must remember that when we were turning the millennia and the Y2K was supposed to happen, the T2000s were coming, we were afraid that programming languages that were no longer able to account for date storage would lead to the complete devolution of our civilization, right? Because computation practices are so integrally time organization practices. It does mean that time is seen both as a resource that is open to manipulation and subject reorganization. So time in computation is not something to be experienced, remembered, or sensed, but to be counted, arranged, and reorganized. And this essentially means that time, which has often been a measure of intensity, right? How do you experience time, has now become a measure of scale, which is how do you count the time that you're of experience or of loading, so to speak. So take the example of some of the most ardent discussions around sexual harassment and call-out cultures that we've been experiencing the last few years, particularly around the hashtag #MeToo. I'm sure this is not a new story for anybody on this call, but in India, in the wake of the Me Too movement, there appeared a list called LOSHA, which was a list of sexual harassers in academia, compiled by a graduate student called Raya Sarkar, and created out of first-hand accounts of survivors who chose to remain anonymous. Like all digital lists, this was not set in stone, right? But it was poised for expansion, populated as more stories kept on coming out. And as the post gathered attention and circulation, the list grew. By November 2017, the list had the names of 72 male academics in India, many of which named prominent, highly influential and powerful academics. Many of them, to the dismay of our larger academic community, had talked the talk of social justice, gender equality, and safe spaces in their academic careers. So, among many other critiques, one of the first things that came out was that Losha was read as fake, not because it did not sound credible, because let's face it, misogyny and sexual harassment in the workspace are now known truths, right? Even if they are not facts. I don't know it for a fact, but I know it to be a truth. But the reason why Losha was read as fake was because it was produced without a timestamp, right? The stories of the survivors were not necessarily present. They were not live testimonies. Some of it had happened in institutional spaces that have gone and in relationships which cannot be remembered. Some of it referred to incidents which, retrospectively speaking, were not illegal per se at that time, but with hindsight, which signal kind of a legacy of structural and sexual harassment. The survivor was not one individual, but a collective of men and women, and hence the list could only be seen as symptomatic without the onus of providing proof and evidences that are impossible to get when incidents are old and without credible witnesses and paper trails. So the Losha survivor stories were without the tyranny of a timestamp and allowed to enter a new temporal relationship with the accused perpetrators, right? It's a relationship that is dated, a confrontation that follows the temporal experience of people who speak out. So even before viral attention economy sprouted, fakeness was considered a condition of time. Because over time, truth becomes blurry, hollow, suspect, fake. What we forget is what is lost. What is lost cannot always be retrieved. And when it can no longer be retrieved, the event itself loses its legitimacy. The testimony becomes hollow. And if we continue to believe in it, we are suddenly entering into fakeness, a weird condition where we couldn't know it for a fact, but knew that it was the truth. And of course, the immediate corollary to this are the people who hopefully you and I would think they are nuts, right? These are anti-vaccination peoples or flat earthers who believe that the earth is flat, or recently in the North American USA elections, or Trump supporters who were simultaneously asking to stop the count and count the vote because both of them were about a projection into the future and choosing the future that they liked. Which brings me to my concluding thesis for today on why fakeness is so difficult to understand within the digital space. It's because of the difference between verification of facts and understanding of truth. It's important to realize that digital technologies are constantly reliant on verification of facts, right? So give a large data set to an algorithm which is kind of parsing it, and it will show you where the errors are, where the unverified information is, where the unauthenticated users are. In fact, in the world of big data, algorithms, and especially what we now know as AI or artificial intelligence, are the only way by which this data verification can happen. However, if you introduce a willing error in the data set, a lot of fun can begin. Let me give you two examples. One is the example of an image, which is a sign for okay, like top, good, whatever. So one is the universal sign for okay, and the other is from a cartoon series about a green chilled out frog. In 2019, both of these images got immediately classified as expressions of hate speech online. So with the OK sign, it actually began as a hoax, right, as a prank, like many things do on this wonderfully strange platform called 4chan. So an anonymous user wanted to prank what he called liberals and leftists by co-opting the OK sign, making them believe that everybody who does this is a secret coded gesture for what they were calling the OKKK white supremacists, right? So like the Ku Klux Klan in the US, this was the OKKK white supremacist clan. The prank got traction. Hundreds of thousands of memes and fake information started flooding social media. People started using this as a secret gesture to signal something sinister. But in about 3 months, this fake sign actually got appropriated by neo-Nazi associations in the US. On the internet, the sign became a real thing, something that right-wing white supremacists started adding to their posts. A Trump supporter used that sign famously in a Trump rally. And thus, the contamination of a data set by people who willfully produced information that was verifiable but untrue managed to produce an entirely new symbol of racist politics in the larger global discourse. Pepe the Frog, who began his career on the internet with a meme which says "chill out, man," underwent a similar treatment, where, as an ironical gesture, one user photoshopped him in front of a concentration camp from the Second World War, spewing anti Semitic slogans. So, Pepe, who was otherwise just a children's cartoon, got caught up in people objecting to this usage and people who got their kicks out of trolling the people who were offended. In less than 2 months, an ironic meme eventually became such a widespread symbol of white supremacy that the original intention and content of Pepe got completely overridden by this new truth that has been ascribed to him, especially because white supremacists continue to use now Pepe's face in their Twitter and Instagram bios and profiles. So in both of these instances, right, the OK signal and the Pepe supremacy are lessons of how new content gets measured differently at time and scale change. The capacity to pin meaning to an object, not because of its original intention, but by the sheer scale of repetition, the weight of hyperlinking, and the correlations caused by algorithms that can know the fact but not the truth, and thus be fooled into creating these new meanings is an essential condition of fakeness that we are living through. So, where do we go from here? Right? What do we do when faced with the fact that we can recognize fakeness only if it is badly done? That most of the time, fakeness that appeals to our human emotions, our core beliefs, and our view of the world passes through easily because it fools us into believing that it is in fact true. I don't have immediate solutions or technological hacks into this, but I do have an approach. And that approach is about changing the axis through which we understand human truths. Right now, the digital technologies of truth telling are presented to us as more than human. We are told that these technologies, because they are, rational, they depend on logic, and they are infallible in nature, that they are better, stronger, and more robust than human beings in recognizing fake news and misinformation. They store information, they remember information, they query and organize it across time and scale, and hence they are more robust, we are told. In some strange ways, these technologies are almost given to us as aspirational, right? We must aspire to be like technologies because they are cleaner and hence more desirable. And they are the goals that we must measure up. And my single proposition for us today is that this needs to be changed. Digital technologies are measures of factness and not truthiness. They are indicators of verification, but not judgment values of fakeness. They are measures, but they are not things that we have to measure up to. We do not have to become like machines to escape fakeness. We just need to recognize that there are machine facts and human truths. And sometimes they coincide, but staying between them and working through them is where our collective futures are going to lie. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. Thank you so much for listening to me for such a long time, and hopefully there will be questions, comments, ideas, clarifications if I have not been very clear about what I was saying, and I'm happy to jump into those. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We are now open to questions from the audience that they'd like Dr. Nishan Shah to answer. May I request Dr. Rushit Dubal to coordinate the Q&A session?
Um, uh, Hello, sir. Lushit this side. First of all, thank you for an eye-opener session. I'm sure the way we are looking at social media narratives is now we are looking at a different light. So the forum is open for all of them. Participants can drop a line on YouTube and Zoom, and we'll take the questions in the session. Right. So by the time the question is coming, I have a question to you, sir. Right. This question is specifically about how digital space is killing the information. Right, you talked about it right now, and the same is there in one of your articles that digital space is killing the information by overproducing it. So does it mean that this information overproduction is reducing our sensitivity to understand and absorb this event and issues?
Oh, that's such a great question. Thank you. Yeah, so the misinformation and the information overload is something that I've been kind of tracking and working through. And I think you have hit the nail on the head with that question, right? Because I'm not suggesting that digital technologies are killing information. I'm suggesting that digital technologies are making it impossible for information to be understood at a human scale. That the speed, the quantity, and the circulation of information is now so huge that we can't even remember things that we say about ourselves, right? Like, so all of us who are on social media, like you have Facebook accounts or Twitter or Instagram or TikTok, do you remember what you ate for breakfast 1.5 years ago? You obviously don't, but there is an algorithm that does, right? Facebook continuously keeps on throwing up memories to you, reminding you that this is what you were doing 4 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, depending on when you started your accounts. This incredible idea that you are no longer in possession of, or you can no longer be trusted to remember your own information sets, to tell your own stories, and that if you do, your truth can be counteracted by an algorithmic fact, right? The things that you want to tell about yourselves can very easily be overridden by somebody else who produces a factual, verified information set, which says that I don't care whether you experience this or not, or this is your narrative or not, what you are saying is fake now. Right, and that is the digital narrative trap that we are falling into. So in India, for example, we've been talking a lot about WhatsApp lynch mobs, for instance, because let's face it, I mean, the largest misinformation factory in India right now is WhatsApp, right? It's the closed groups where there is an enormous amount of misinformation that's circulating as fact. And it's really fascinating because the people who act on these facts know that they are not, then they are fake, but it corresponds to their idea of what they think is the truth. And so this distinction between truth as a human function and fact, which is an algorithmic function, is something that I'm kind of pushing forward and saying, when we look at our narratives, we need to stop talking about factoids and truthiness as the same thing, because they are not. That facts are only one way of making sense of the truth. But they are not necessarily the only way, or they are not surrogates of truth telling in any way.
Okay. There is one.
I had a question, Nishant.
Yeah.
So Nishant, thanks for this wonderful presentation, and I've been following your thoughts and your writings for a very long time. So I really appreciate the trajectories that it has taken. Since you are using the word space, I think what you're proposing has a lot of repercussion, not only in the digital space and how we construct our own narratives or our own identities, but I think what I'm finding as of interest is how actually it can destabilize real space, real physical space that I can touch and feel, because I think what you're proposing is that how the intent of the information or the manner in which it gets circulated or recirculated has the possibility to suspend our own system or agency of verifying, understanding, or weighing the information. And I allow that faculty to be kind of subletted for the technology to do it, for Facebook to do it, or someone else to do it. And I think what it does on the long run is that, and I can already see that in the manner in which real architecture is being discussed, in the manner in which buildings are being discussed that should be changed, that should be demolished, or that should be retained, and what we should be building, because there is no idea of truth. So what the serious nature of this, the repercussion of this could be that it has the potential to destabilize our own ideas of how we should be building. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
I was just wondering, it can be a very interesting kind of a project to see parallels of the destabilizing trend within architecture. Everything goes. This also goes and that also goes, because the intent of the information is making you believe that. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I'm going to be very careful of what I say, because I don't want to tap into the exploding controversy about what's going to happen to the IIM Ahmedabad campus, where we are trying to figure out what to do with conservation, safety, preservation, and the intention of the architect, the intention of the committees, the intention of the students, and so on. I'm going to step away from it because it's too raw, I think. Considering that we are located in Gujarat, I'm also not going to talk about how the last 20 years have been revisions of architectural history, about how literally physical spaces have been demolished for different communities and symbols. I'm going to stay away from that too. Let me come up with something which is perhaps more relatable and maybe hopefully less alienating for conversations. So this idea of space and your experience of space and the intention of space has perhaps been the most visible in the current pandemic that we are experiencing, right? Because across the globe, one of the first things that people told us that because there is a public crisis, a public health crisis, the best thing you can do to stay safe and stay alive is to stay at home, right? So there is this kind of reconfiguration of what the space of the home means. Because your home is your place for shelter. Your home is your last refuge. Your home is the only way by which you are going to keep contamination and pathology outside of it, and so on. We have never glorified our home so much as a space of happiness and joy, which comes with the promise of, refuge and so on. And if you look at the facts of being at home, you start realizing that the experience that we are being forced into of recognizing that our homes are wonderful, happy spaces is completely counterintuitive. In the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Gender Violence in India in 2017, it was told that 56% of women experience domestic abuse, violence, and sexual harassment in the Indian houses, right? That 56% of women, which means that 1/4 of our national population is in fact experiencing home as a space of threat, of danger, of hostility, and of abuse. India has a documented case of 28% of our children experiencing sexual abuse, and 90% of all of those sexual abuses on our children happen within the confines of our homes. They are often by people who are in trust of them and guardianship of them, and so on. For transgender communities in India, 90% of deaths of transgender people happen within their homes. They are killed, they are destroyed, and they are bullied and abused by the people who they share and cohabit their space with. I can give you statistic after statistic of why for disadvantaged people, people who are non-conforming, people who are on the peripheries, people who are crossing boundaries of caste, religion, sexuality, gender, home has never been a safe space. In fact, a lot of our work has been done, beginning with the Bauhaus movement in Germany, for example, in trying to figure out how do you keep the home safe and what are the kinds of rules and regulations that are being put into place. But there has been such an enormous amount of circulation of home as a happy space and home as the last space of refuge that we have overwritten our experience of danger and threat by believing into this idea that home is a good thing. And if you had to look at all what was happening on social media narratives, a lot of us who were, engaging in baking, I think that's all we did during the pandemic is make food and take pictures of it. And it was quite astonishing because while we were sheltering in happiness in our homes, there were all these migrant workers, millions of them, who were not only homeless, but who were not allowed to go back even to their imaginary homes that they wanted to go back to. Right? So these experiences of home, its threat, and so on is a very clear idea of how a digital narrative can completely take over the physical experience of communities, of people, and of entire people who are not considered as, I don't know, human enough to have home or to experience the privilege of home in some way. So I don't know if that helps in perhaps framing the conversation a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good beginning point to take the questions of actual physical experience. And I think this is a very good example to take. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nishan.
The next question is from a student of journalism. What are the various ways people manipulate and hijack a discourse on social media and then try to build their own narrative?
Oh. Now, if only I knew all the ways by people do hijacking of social media narratives, I would be like a millionaire by now and no longer giving talks to anybody. But I think it's a really interesting question. I don't really have like a handbook of how people do it, but if I can relate it to what I was presenting to you today, you realize that this capacity for hijacking of social media narratives is new for us. It's called information drift in communication studies. It's also called piggybacking or hijacking of different kinds of threads in social media discourse. The reason why it's appearing right now is because we have accepted the idea that there is no such thing as a core fundamental truth. Right? So if you look at any particular narrative, so on digital social media, there is something called Godwin's law, which essentially says that if you're on any discussion forum or a bulletin board like 4chan or Reddit or even Wikipedia, every time there is a conflict, in about 16 moves, somebody will call somebody Hitler. Like anytime something happens within as a conflict space, we just tell people saying you are being a Nazi or you're being a racist or you're being a Hitler. And then it should be the end of conversation because there is nothing left to say. So maybe what I'm trying to propose to you is that the more we believe, the more we let go of the idea that there is no such thing as a fundamental truth and only depend on facts to tell our stories, the more we are going to be polarized. Because you are going to produce a fact and I'm going to produce a fact. And the internet, because it's so hyperlinked together, is a strange space where almost anything can be produced as a fact, right? If you have a bizarre idea and go and search for it in Google right now, you will be amazed that at least 10,000 people have also thought of that bizarre idea and they have written about it and there's a video around it and it's been produced in a certain way without any context of where it is operating on. So when you are thinking about this kind of conflict of narratives between the digital space, you are no longer thinking about just ways of doing it. The ways of doing it is very simple. You suspend the experience of truthfulness and replace it by the facts and verifications produced by algorithmic structures. And as long as you can basically show with a hyperlink that something is in fact, somebody else is supporting what you are saying, it immediately becomes a fact, even though it might not be the truth. And the OK sign symbol is a prime example of it, right? Because there is nothing in this particular sign which we use all the time saying must hai, acha hai, good, right? And so on. There is nothing about that sign which makes it into a white supremacist symbol. But the capacity for just many people to believe in it and then write about it and then hyperlink and cross-link it to each other already forms a different kind of a conversation where you can no longer call them fake news. You can't even call them misinformation because they really believe in it and this is the truth. And so you are in this post-truth space where all narratives are equal and then eventually whose narrative will gain precedence will be judged entirely by how many followers you have or how many people you have and how much circulation and repetition you are going to be able to make into that. So as younger scholars in media and journalism, this is going to be something that's going to be exciting for you, but also challenging because you might uncover a truth that nobody likes. And it's highly possible that there might be a lot of people who will produce facts or enough facts to in fact counteract the truth that you have, right? So if there is one person's story and there are 100 people who say, but that story is false, then you are going to have to make the call saying, because 100 people are saying this is the truth, it must be so, despite the fact that this one person is saying what's happening. And this was, again, to go back to the example I was giving of the list of sexual harassers in academia in the Me Too movement. This is something that we saw over and over again. Every time a survivor came and said, this is what happened to me, this is my experience of it. It happened to me 10 years ago, and I'm speaking about it for the first time to you now. Continuously, people said, proof kahan hai, right? Where is your evidence? Where is your fact? And if you do not produce a fact, then the truth of your body, of your experience is no longer valid, or it's no longer counted. So we really need to start thinking about how do we tell truths when the only thing that is demanded of us is fact. And I think there is a very large role that humanities, cultural studies, and social sciences have to play here, because facts are empirical sciences and technological demands, whereas truths are human and social demands. And we need to find a vocabulary of telling human truths rather than depending upon machine facts.
Okay. The next question is from Pragya Shakar, Associate Professor, SEDA. You mentioned that in the end, truth may not be logical, but rationality is what we trust as a modern society. Would you please elaborate on that?
Oh, thanks, Pragya. I think that's a really good question. It allows me to do one of my most fun exercises ever. So I mean, I don't want to go into the epistemology and ontology of truth telling, because in the European discourse, it often goes back to enlightenment and kind of doing this mind-body divide and saying that's where it comes from. But those of us who come from, for example, an Indian philosophical or a cultural approach, we know that the Advait is also equally valid. But what I'm always fascinated by, this relationship between rationality or logic and possibility is in fact two particular competing disciplines. So let me just do this as a very small exercise, right? So if I were to ask you to make a distinction between the first order of logic and the first order of mathematics, I don't know if many people would be able to do it, because we often think that mathematics is logical, right? And that logic and mathematics are more or less the same thing. But ontologically speaking, as disciplinary measures, they are two completely different things. And I'll illustrate it very quickly. So if I were to take my phone and if I were to throw it up in the air, which I won't because it's very expensive and I like it. But if I were to throw it up in the air, and if I ask you what happens next, I am presuming most of you will tell me that the phone will come down, right? It will fall. Now, the reason you will tell me this is not because you know physics, not because you know gravitational theories, not because you are subscribing to Einstein's theory of linear relativity and so on and so forth, but because you know from experience that you have seen that if things are thrown up, they fall down, right? And you've seen it happening so many different times that you know that the most logical outcome of this particular phenomena is that if things go up, they come down. What you have done essentially is pattern recognition. Right? This is what algorithms do. They look at a phenomenon and then they look at it over and over and over again till they can be almost sure that this is the logical outcome of what's going to happen. Now, if you were an experimental physicist or a mathematician, and if I asked you this question about what will happen if I throw the phone up in the air, they would actually be paralyzed and would not be able to give an answer. Because if they subscribe to contemporary physics and if they believe in a multiverse, multiple universe theory or a quantum theory of matter, they will have to account for a fact that as I throw up the phone, a wormhole might open up above my head. The phone might travel into another dimension. It might fall on the head of another Nishant who is giving this lecture and kill him. And thus, of course, start the best science fiction story of whether this was murder or suicide. Right? Now, it sounds completely illogical. It sounds completely improbable, but it is possible. Right? And there is a distinction in our human understanding between possibility and probability. We know that a lot of things are probable, but we also compute continuously all the things that are possible. Right? This is why art becomes important. This is why storytelling becomes important. This is why imagination, intuition, affect, spirituality, all of these things are not talking about things as they already are, but things as they could be. computational truths are logical truths. They in fact remove all possibility from the final result because possibilities are statistically anomalous, right? The chances of something happening is so small that we don't need to compute it because we need to save all our computation powers to compute and predict what's going to happen immediately next. And this was my distinction. So when we buy into probability-driven truths, what we are essentially engaging with are machine facts. So everything that cannot be verified by the machine is now not going to be truthful. And one of the, to make it, sorry, I'm giving a very long-winded answer, but I get very excited by this. One of the key examples that came out for is, we were doing a live project, live ethnography of the Aadhaar project when it was coming out. So when the first Aadhaar biometric enrollment started, there were a whole bunch of people who were told that machines continuously kept on telling them that they are not human beings. And the reason why this happened was that our physical biometric machines were actually built by a British company who never realized that about 40% of the Indian population engages in so much manual labor that they have no fingerprints. Their fingerprints are literally eroded from just working with their hands. And they were all being forced to sing, Nana jorthi dabao, right? Like press your thumb even harder because something is wrong with you because the machine refuses to recognize the probability, which is how your kind of biometrics are mapped and so on. So it's this thing, it's this continuous conflict between the probability-driven facts and the human possibility-driven truths that we need to negotiate when thinking about fakeness in the current times. Okay, I'll stop. But this is all coming out in my new book, which is out in February, so you can read more about it then.
The next question is by a second-year journalism student, Devanshu. He said that author Jürgen Habermas wrote about the role of criticism and the control in the formation of public opinion. In an era of influencers and echo chambers, the concept of identity is disintegrating. What does it mean to have an identity today?
That's such a great question, and thanks for bringing up Habermas. I mean, I worked in Germany for a few years, and I was actually getting overwhelmed by how much Habermas kind of still populates that discourse. But it's a really great question, and it might be good to understand that when Habermas was talking about the structural transformation of the public sphere, for example, he wasn't talking so much about physical spaces as much he was talking about specific kinds of technologies, right? And these were technologies of print. Habermas was essentially kind of signaling to you that the democratization of print media is leading to a new kind of informationality. And this informationality is slightly scary. One of the best references for you, if you want to follow up on this, is by Carolyn Marvin, who is a historian of new technologies. And she has a wonderful book called When Old Technologies Were New, right? So technologies that we consider old, what was happening when they were new. And she reminds us that every new technology has necessarily changed the very way in which we understand the notion of publicness, and hence subsequently the idea of identity. So Habermas was essentially signaling to you that with the print media, which works on a broadcast model, which means that there is a centralized body, a database, an archive, which can do verifications on your behalf, the ways in which identities were being constructed and experienced has changed. Because for the longest time, even within feudal Europe, the ways, or in Germany in particular, where the East German, West German, but also the post-war identity politics were so stratified, he was telling you that for the longest time, identity was based on witnessing, right? So if you say that I am this person, and if you have two people who can vouch for it and saying, indeed, this is the person that is claiming to be, then that identity was considered to be valid. The emergence of the print-based public sphere necessarily meant that the people who were vouching for you were replaced by the state, right? Or a central authority who was now vouching for you. So you could go and say, I am Nishant, and somebody says, that's not true, it's a lie. And then the state would look at my identification, my birth certificate, and say, no, it's true, he's Nishant, right? And the only way you can do it is because of print-based archives where records can be verified. So identities are not necessarily the same as subjectivity. It's not about what your narrative of who you are is, it's about who validates it and verifies it in some ways. And I think with the digital, what we are now experiencing is that the state or the central structure no longer works because we are working on a peer-to-peer network. So the central broadcast model has been replaced by a peer-to-peer network where you are no longer being verified by two human witnesses. You are being verified by the number of links, hyperlinks that link back to you and give you weightage in different ways. So when you are thinking through questions of influencers, questions of multiple sources of validation and verification, it boils down to this. Whose verification are you going to believe? Whose validation are you going to accept? If, for example, there was a conflict between an identity verification between Facebook and an identity verification between Aadhaar, and if they're in conflict, which one would you believe? Which is going to be the more reliable one? So you might want to think about identity now not being an experienced thing, identity not being a subjective thing, but identity is something that's being verified. And you want to start putting your questions on who's doing the verification. So when an influencer puts out a specific kind of information set, who's verifying it and who's giving it legitimacy is the question that you want to ask, because it's no longer the state. It's no longer just private, centralized databases and archives, but it's different kinds of people and communities. And hence we see that more and more identity politics are actually majoritarianism and populist politics, right? Because all you need is for a certain number of people to endorse and link to what you are saying, and then it becomes the truth. It no longer needs anybody else to validate it in a certain way. I hope that's helpful to kind of think through this more.
Right. I have one more question. In one of your article, feel free to unfriend. You mentioned that the algorithm of social media is engineering the behavior to put into machines and database. Does it mean that it is intentional by the social media platforms?
I don't want to kind of villainize only social media platforms. I would say that that is the basic promise of digitization, right? The promise of the digital was to replace or to simulate our real life experiences with digital experiences. So for example, we have all bought into the hallucination that this Zoom call is the same as me doing an in-person talk at the university. We just take it as a granted that everything that is in the physical can be simulated and can be kind of put into the digital space in some way. But then it comes with obvious questions because we are so seduced by this promise of digitization. We don't really talk about what is lost, and we talk continuously about what is afforded. And I'm very happy about what the affordances are, right? Because I have friends right now who are in different time zones and different geographies who are not in Baroda, who I know are a part of this conversation because they said they're going to come and listen in. I'm happy that we can have this conversation because travel would have been impossible for me, but I'm still able to share some of these ideas and thoughts with you. But we very rarely talk about what are the intentions and what is put into these digital simulations. And because we don't talk about it, we often kind of presume that the digital technologies are neutral, right? That they just take up reality and then they translate it into something that simulates it. Whereas we know that digital technologies amplify the same kind of politics and prejudices and biases and preferences that real life communities have and people espouse for themselves. So it would be interesting to understand that our technologies are not neutral, but they are in fact expressions of our political biases and prejudices. And so in that particular op-ed, when I was talking about how there is a re-engineering of hatred, I think that's what I was kind of looking at in terms of how, because the lifeblood of social media is circulation, they don't care if you put out information that is absolutely hateful, as long as it's going to have engagement and as long as its people are going to respond to it positively or negatively, because that's how social media platforms run. But it's also endemic in the very digital architecture of how our technologies function, that we continuously pretend to be neutral, while in fact amplifying some of the worst kinds of human expressions and histories in our digital interaction in different ways. I can give you more examples if that's not clear, but I think that's where I would stop for this one.
Uh, if there is more question from any participant, feel free to drop a line or unmute yourself and ask. Yeah. Okay, we'll just wait for 1 minute more, Nishan. Maybe
Sure.
someone is dropping a line or something. Right. By the time, I'll just ask one more question. There was a term in one of the article, and it says that increasingly collapsing free internet. So it is there was a twist, and I couldn't get it clearly. So if you can just throw some light on this term.
Okay, this is like going into an exam where I have to remember everything that I have written. It's like, oh God, what did I mean when I said that?
Okay, you can pass it.
I don't particularly remember the
Right. Okay.
that you might be doing with, but I mean, it's I guess it's a very straightforward argument that when the World Wide Web was being constructed in the late 90s, Tim Berners-Lee wrote this wonderful manifesto about how the World Wide Web is going to be this free, open, democratic space that is owned by people, and it's going to really help us recreate a new world. And none of the aspirations and political values that Tim Berners-Lee has come to fruition. If anything, the internet and digital technologies have made us more polarized, made us more cautious, made us more hateful. But at the same time, the internet, which was supposed to be this global free protocol, has essentially been privatized, right? I mean, there is no such thing as an open internet left. There are still protocols at a very technological level. So for example, the TCP/IP protocol, which allows for most network interactions to happen, is still open and everybody can use it. But I think there is nothing left on our digital devices, which is in fact open and free and owned by people. Everything from our hardware to our operating systems to the different kinds of softwares that we use is a series of negotiations between intellectual property rights regimes, different kinds of licenses, terms of services, intermediary liability. It's become such an over-regulated space that the capacity to really be disruptive with the digital technologies is next to zero now. You can innovate, but innovation is not the same as disruption. Innovation is just making more money for specific corporations more and more, right? And I think that's something that I'm not an open source activist, but I have colleagues who do it, and I've learned from them a lot about how necessary it is to keep on. It sounds almost a very Marxist thing, saying that if you want your products to be fair, you want to take control of the means of production. And we have lost control of our means of production on the digital space long time ago. So even if I work in an art school, in a design school, and my students are incredible creators and they have amazing imagination. And when they work with pens and papers and their bodies and music, they have all kinds of freedoms to do everything that they want. And then you give them a software, and then the software dictates what they can do and cannot do, right? Like if you are in an architecture school, you can have the most wonderful imagination, but if AutoCAD's not allowing you to do it, then it doesn't become a model. And you don't know how to materialize it in some way. So this kind of taking control of the means of production of the digital is something I think that's going to be particularly needed for younger generations who want to imagine a different kind of a world coming together.
So I think with this note, we can conclude this session. Thank you so much, Nishan sir, for patiently addressing our question. It was a delight listening to your insights. Now Isha will take over from this point.
Yes. So thank you, sir. And as the program draws to an end, I request Zerna, first year student BA JMC, to propose a vote of thanks.
It is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks. Thank you, Dr. Nishant Shah, for the insightful talk. You have offered many points to us to think about and delve on them more. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Nilay Yagnik, Provost, for your encouragement for the event. Thank you all the attendees who have joined us today for the talk. I thank Dinesh Panchal, sir, and Neerav Darji, sir, for all the technical help. Thank you, Mr. Rashid, for coordinating the Q&A. Thank you one and all, and have a pleasant evening.
Right. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure. Thank you for listening to me. I know how tiring it is to keep on looking at screens and trying to listen to people all the time, and you're doing it all day long. So thank you, and I wish you all a wonderful 2021.